We are expecting a big crowd tonight as usual, so we'll give you a couple minutes to roll in. Welcome to all of our high school partners and our IEC partners. This is our special night for all of our partners to do the how to pay, how to borrow webinar. So class of 2023 parents, you guys are in the home stretch. Woohoo! Almost done. It's time to figure out the last few things here and then hopefully enjoy your summer with your kids because you'll
The
be
funnest part, paying the bill.
You'll be waving goodbye at the dorm pretty soon. So remember that when you're looking at all these big numbers and figuring this out. So tonight we will go over all the nuts and bolts. This is actually our meatiest, for lack of a better way to say it, presentation, hands down. Matt and I have even talked about probably too meaty, and we'll probably have to cut it down a little, but
yeah, and everybody's situation is different, right? I mean, the really tricky part about this is that today was a great example, right? I had 4 different meetings with families, 4 different recommendations for what loans they should take, right? Everybody's different. So we're going to teach you from a high level. Our job tonight is to educate you on all your options, help you understand the pros and cons of each, get you thinking about which one probably makes the most sense for your family. But you're going to have the opportunity to meet with anybody on our team one-on-one. So just keep that in mind. We'll talk about that when we close tonight. If you want to meet with anybody on our team, and everybody on our team is an expert when it comes to this piece, and you just want some peace of mind so you can say, listen, and a couple of these meetings I have this time of year, this is rare, but some people are just like, I just want to gut check this thing. I want to make sure that somebody looks at this and goes, am I looking at this the right way? Here's what I'm thinking. And once or twice I've said, I do exactly what you're doing. But even that, I think peace of mind is great to have. So, and I'll kick it over to Peggy. She's going to kind of get us started tonight, but just very quickly, just for the, like we said, there's just so much content tonight. We can't take our time with the pleasantries like we usually like to and tell our kind of stories as much as we like to. But as briefly as I can, I'm Matt Carpenter. I'm one of the founders at College Aid Pro. I've been doing this for about 2 decades. Class of 2023 will have been my 19th class. So that I've been through this process with. So I like to say I've seen it all or pretty close to it. And this part of the process is less sexy, but it's really important. It really matters what loan we take, when we use what resources. Do we use all our 529 up front? Do we spread it out? Things like this, they do matter, right? So we just want to make sure that you get it right. That's our job. Let's help you make the right decision for your family. And that's our goal tonight. And I think you're in good hands. I know you're in great hands with the fairy godmother of financial aid. For those of you that know her, for those of you that don't, here she is. Peggy, take us away.
All right. And just because I know we'll get these questions, you are going to get the recording and the slides tomorrow. And if you have questions, I know people were putting some stuff in the chat that had an echo. It looks like I told people go in and out. That seemed to fix the problem. But questions, please put in Q&A. You can be anonymous and they get captured. So don't put them in the chat. There's 2 places for us to look. We have a lot of people on here. So let me share. And oops, I'm at the bottom. Here we go. And let's kick this off. All right. If you don't know us, we are College Aid Pro, and this is truly our mission to end the student debt crisis by empowering families to shop smarter for college. And what that really means is educating you, educating advisors, educating IECs, everybody that's in this space, because the more educated you are, and if you're an informed consumer in this process, you are way ahead of the game. And if you just have one child, not just, but if you have an only child and you're at the end of this with your only child, that's great. That's great that you're here. If you have younger children and a child that's about to go to college, then you're getting all schooled up here. So it's all good. And there is Matt. There we are. Everybody should have received an email earlier today asking you to set up your free MyCap account. So Matt will pop the link that mycap.collegeaidpro.com into the chat. if you haven't set it up, it's a good thing to set up. If you have younger kids, you can continue to use this, and we have some resources in our software around the loan. So we strongly recommend that you set up that free MyCap account if you haven't done it. It also helps you see what are soon going to be called your SAIs, and helps you see where you fit in affordability, which is really what we're all about.
And I guess, Peggy, I know we're not going to spend any time on this tonight, but it's worth noting, especially for those of you that are brand new with us, it'll also allow you to gut check your award, right? Because one thing that we do is we project, here's what you should have got at the college that you were accepted into versus how did you actually do. Believe it or not, it's not too late. As a matter of fact, one of the meetings that I had today, I was able to look at their award and say, you didn't get enough money from this school based on your situation. I'm very confident they're going to go back to that school based on the recommendation we made. And I'm very confident they're going to get some more money. So they're going to have to borrow less. So that's one of the first things you want to do as you set up your account, or if you've already created your account, just make sure, well, what did I actually get at this school versus what CAP projected? Because there could be an opportunity. It's not too late to push back and get some more money. That's a different presentation, but
yeah. Well, and somebody asked, when you go in there, you can just pick the free account. It's on the left. And then if you want to upgrade later or book an hour, and we'll talk about that at the end, you can do that. But for now, just set up your free account, which is the far left when you get in there. Okay, so let me move my Zoom stuff. So what are we coming up to here? So schools are going to start submitting bills for the fall semester. If it's quarters, might be a little bit delayed, but they hit up mid-July, and they're, depending on the school, they could be due right before classes start, or they could be due, my daughter's was the first Friday of the first week of classes. So it just depends on the school, and you'll get to know it. And then months later for the second semester, same deal. And it's new to you now. You'll get used to it and won't be a big deal. If loans are going to be part of your strategy, they usually can be completed and issued in not too much time, like 1 to 3 days. This is the time to start looking at this. That's why we're doing this webinar intentionally at this time. So you're not early. You need to take the stuff that you learned tonight and dig in and start looking at your loan options and submitting applications. Colleges have payment plans, which is what's referenced in the bottom left. I'll hit that in more detail in a slide coming up in a second, but you don't have to feel like you have to pay a whole semester up front if that's a lot, because it is a lot, right? So I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so cash flow. Cash flow is a big deal here. As the slide says, $100 a month extra toward college every month, that could save you $5,000. And that's $5,000 that you don't need to borrow at 4.99% or even more. So it's really a big deal. So this is a time to really kind of sit back, and it's an opportunity to look at your financial life. If you have a gym membership that you're not using, you should probably be using it. But if you're not, maybe you cut back on that. You want to start, we call it, your financial junk drawer, right? But just start thinking about places that maybe there's waste. Maybe you're paying for a bunch of streaming services and you're not using all of them, or you really don't need them all, whatever it is. But making some changes that maybe don't seem big by themselves, if you make a few of them, that could make a difference. And like the slide said just before, even saving $100, it really compounds over the time that your child is in college. So I recommend you just take some time to think about that. If you have a budget, which I know is a dirty word for a lot of people, kind of look at that. Are you living in your budget? What does that look like? So this is what I was referencing before. So this is a way to not take a chunk of money and borrow to pay for the whole semester. Almost every college has some sort of payment plan. I've even had parents that are charging it, right? Which is shocking to me that colleges will do that and not charge convenience fees. You have to be careful. You don't want to charge and then owe 18% on your credit card. I'm not encouraging that at all. But colleges will have payment plans, and it's typically over 10 months. and they will start sooner rather than later. And you don't have to take out a payment plan for the full amount that you owe for that semester or that year. And almost all the time, they're not charging you extra. Like if you do it with your car insurance, you're actually paying more. There's an upfront enrollment fee, and you pay that. That's a one-time deal, and then it's spread out. And that can really help. If that helps with your cash flow and you know a bonus is coming in or whatever, then you're not taking out massive loans and you're able to make it work, or take out less loans knowing the chunks that you owe when you owe them. And colleges do that very intentionally because they know it's a lot. It's a lot to pay. So resources, this is to give you a high level overview. Every family is going to be different. Okay. But if you,
is this already my third interruption, 12 minutes in tonight?
I don't know. I'll just give you a break. Go ahead.
I'm hitting my quota early tonight, but I think it's important to understand here, and we got a couple questions. You don't need to do, if you set up a monthly payment plan with the college, it doesn't have to be for the entire balance. Okay. So if you owe $40,000 to a college and they have a 10-month payment plan, which is, like you just saw, the standard deal, a lot of people look at that and go, I can't do $4,000 a month. The payment plan's out for me. You could do $400 a month. And then that's $4,000 less that somebody's going to have to borrow, right? So keep that in mind. It's, as a matter of fact, it's very common that people will chop this up a few different ways. We have X amount in savings. We're going to do X amount in a payment plan, and then we're going to borrow the difference. So that's just an important one. We got a couple questions on that front. Sorry, Peggy.
Yes, and you will get a recording tomorrow because I screwed up that question. Didn't answer it. I said I answered it live, so I just did. Okay, so what resources you might have and when you use them? Again, this is not a blanket recommendation. This really needs to be done one-on-one. So if you have what are called custodial accounts, they're called UGMAs or UTMAs for short. If you've never heard of that, don't stress. You don't have it. It's fine. But if you do, and that rings a bell, these are assets of the student. So many times, but not all the time, it's good to use those. But when you liquidate them, it's a taxable event, and it's a taxable event to your child. So there's moving pieces here. So you really want to understand what you're doing before you do it. And so that's where you might want to talk to us to get your unique plan of how to do this. But that's a bucket that some people have. The second bucket is the most common. You're going to have 529s, Coverdales, prepaid tuition plans. These are all under these college savings accounts by the IRS, under the IRS definitions. And so most of the time, parents are the owners. You've saved this money to pay for college. So that's typically a place you're going to go to. I'm going to talk about a tax credit in a minute where you have to be careful how much you use from these, but it doesn't mean you just max these out and take no loans, because if you run out of this money, which many people do because they don't have enough in a 529 to cover the delta between the aid and the tuition and room and board, then you're stuck. It's loans that Matt's about to talk about in a few minutes, you can't go back and get. So you're going to use these, but again, it's strategic when you use them. Looking at this over a 4-year cash flow, you have to do that. You can't look at it year by year. And then other college savings you might have stocks that you've set aside. Grandparents might have 529s, or your friend from college or whatever. Those can all fit in the mix, and you don't have to strategically use those outside resources anymore, because it's not going to hurt your financial aid like it used to. So those are the different resources. I didn't tell you exactly how to use them. I'm trying to give you ideas, but it's really dependent on your family situation. So you want to get some guidance before you decide. So 529s, you can use these for what the IRS calls qualified higher education expenses. So that's tuition and fees, room and board, books, computer, anything that college requires. The big thing that's not in the definition, which many people don't realize, is travel. So plane tickets are not, you cannot take money out of a 529 or a Coverdale to cover plane tickets. So just keep that in mind. If you take it out for something that's not a qualified higher education expense, you're going to pay a 10% penalty on the earnings and tax on the earnings because it grows tax-free. You never pay tax on the earnings as long as you use them correctly. How do you get the money out of a 529? You just reach out to Vanguard or T. Rowe Price or who's ever running that 529. You ask for the money. You have to keep track of what you're taking the money out for to cover what expenses that are legitimate. They'll give you the whole account if you ask for it. It's not T. Rowe Price or Vanguard's job to keep track of that. It's yours in case you get audited. So keep that in mind. This is another thing. This is in my major sweet spot here. I help families all the time around this and doing the right thing so you don't get stung later. Because it's not just financial aid, it's also tax, right? So you've got to be careful that you're doing the right things when it comes to taking these out. So American Opportunity Tax Credit, we call it AOTC for short. So this is the IRS again. It's $2,500 per year per child. So if you have triplets, it could be $7,500 per year. So it's per child. You see the phase out up here. When you get to 180,000 AGI, adjusted gross income and above, you're no longer eligible. If you're between those two, the 160 and 180, you're going to get less than 2,500. It phases out. And below that, you get the full 2,500. And what it means is if you owe $20,000 in federal income tax, you will now owe $17,500. It comes right off of what you owe. In order to qualify for this credit, you have to have $4,000 of tuition, fees, and book expenses that you pay for, not from an account that has a tax advantage, like a 529, like a Coverdale. Anywhere you can't double, that's the IRS calls it double dipping. You can't get a tax benefit on your 529 and then say, oh, and I'm taking a tax credit on those same dollars. That's double dipping and you can't do it. So that's important to know. If you have a senior and you've got a 529 and you're eligible for this credit, when you pay for that first semester this tax year, make sure you've got $4,000 that you didn't pull out of your 529, for example. And that's based on tax year, not school year. The IRS doesn't care about school year. They care about the tax year, okay? The student must be a dependent of yours for you to claim this credit. So if you're divorced, you got to cooperate and figure that out. And it is a credit per student. If you make more than 180,000, there are other strategies that you could potentially implement. We're not going to get into it now, but it's, if you're a business owner, you can hire your child. And if your child is providing more than half their support, they can claim themselves and maybe get this credit. I don't want to blow your mind and I'm sharing too much. I'm just planting the seed that if you're over that and you're a business owner or there's other pieces there, there are other things you could potentially do that are bad to receive financial aid, but can give you some tax savings. But that's all that more involves strategizing, okay? All right, Matt, I will turn it over to you here.
I'm going to just unmute myself. I was banging away on the keyboard. So lots of great questions. Keep them coming. One of them was, you might have saw me giggle a little bit. I didn't mean to, because the question was, I'm so overwhelmed, I don't even know what to ask. So that's obviously not what we're going for. But again, you're going to get this recording. You're going to get the slide deck, and we're going to evolve and get better and make this a more digestible presentation. But for right now, the fact of the matter is there is this big challenge, and in terms of, we want to make sure you understand all of your options, but there's a fair amount of them. So bear with us, but we will get better. So here's kind of the general borrowing rules, and again, I'm going to touch on these as we go, so you can keep going here, Peggy, and we can probably rip through the first couple, because it's more of a table of contents for what I'm going to cover over the next 20 minutes or so here. We get the question all the time, how much should I let my kid borrow? And this is actually within your cap accounts. We have it specifically. You can look in the affordability section. It will tell you, based on the school, based on the major, what is your expected average salary per school, right? These are in all of your accounts. And then it'll break it down further to say, what does that translate to for your first take home monthly payment versus what your first loan payment is going to be. We give you that down to the dollar, which is a great little feature of the platform. But from a high level, we don't want to borrow more than we're expected to make our first year once we graduate from college, right? So in other words, if I want to go be a teacher, I don't want to borrow more than roughly $40,000, okay? Because once I get above that, the math doesn't work in my favor. And whereas again, if I'm thinking about being an engineering major, well, then I can stomach borrowing a little bit more because my average pay is expected to be, you know, a meaningful amount higher than this education major. So that's a great metric. That's a great goal for some folks at this stage. It might be a little bit too late, but as you're figuring out, well, what should the student be responsible for versus parent, this is a good place to start. And again, all of this thinking is done through you in the platform. Go ahead.
And I would just add in there, you just be careful too, because if your child's going to be an engineer and gets to college and says, yeah, I don't want to be an engineer, and you're loading up on loans thinking of an engineering degree, or they drop out sophomore year, just be careful, right? A lot of kids
100%,
change.
right?
A lot of kids change, so.
And yeah, exactly. And there's going to be transfers, and we're going to have a change of heart in terms of our major, but we want you to anchor to something. And that's kind of a good place to give you some type of something concrete to answer that question. And again, we're going to hit on each of these. So you can go to the next one here, Peggy. We're going to go through each of the different loans. This is where I want to start. And this is kind of in some ways the easiest place to start, in the sense that we, with very few exceptions, recommend everybody take advantage of this program because everybody is entitled to it, so long as you complete the FAFSA and complete some kind of two very small formalities of steps that the students need to complete online. But most of you will recognize that when you got your financial aid award letters from these colleges, just about all of them included a $5,500 federal government student loan, federal direct student loan for freshman year. Some of it might have been unsubsidized, some of it might have been subsidized. Subsidized just means there's no interest accruing during the college years, and we get a 6-month buffer afterwards, right? So for 4.5 years, the government's picking up the interest. And then there's an unsubsidized version, right? Some of you might have got only all of it, $5,500 unsubsidized. But we will recommend that every single family that we work with take advantage of this program, the total of $27,000 over the course of 4 years, for a few reasons. Number one, if you're a family that needs to borrow, this is where you're going to start. There is not a better program available to you. It is a low fixed interest rate, very favorable repayment terms. It is just in the student's name. They don't need a cosigner. They don't need established credit. They're not going to get a bill until 6 months after they graduate from college. And if they go to school after college, if they go to med school, law school, go to get their MBA, it will be deferred until after those programs, right? In another 6-month buffer. So you're not going to get a better program. If you need to borrow, start here, full stop. Okay. Now we work with, and there might be a percentage of you on here where you don't need your kids to borrow. You don't want your kids to borrow. So why would you take advantage of this? Well, number one, even if you don't need your kids to borrow and you have the means to kind of have that come to fruition, I would still recommend that you take advantage of this program, take out that $5,500, pay it off the next day. You do that every year, once a year, and then they graduate as 22-year-olds with established credit. So it's a very nice perk if you have some means. The other reason that we firmly recommend families take advantage of this, because even if you fit in kind of that second category I mentioned, you don't need this, you probably can cover it. Things change, things happen. And if you have one of those unforeseen situations in the negative way, somebody loses a job, the business doesn't go according to plan, now we really need financial aid and we want to appeal for more financial aid. Colleges are going to look back to see if you took advantage of this loan. And if you didn't, they're way less likely to give you any help in subsequent years. So you're almost giving yourself a little bit of insurance to take advantage of that. And we have many, many examples to prove that for better or for worse. And even if you didn't fill out the FAFSA yet and you're a class 2023 family, it's not too late. You can complete the FAFSA now and still be able to use this program for your student next year. So, and we would encourage you to do so. So hopefully that highlights that point, Peg. And then these next couple of slides, I'm not going to spend time on them. And you guys are, like I said, going to get these. These are instructions for how you actually execute the loan, right? 2 steps that the student completes online through this studentaid.gov website using their FSA ID. And that allows the money to actually change hands between the federal government and the colleges. Okay, so that's the federal government program for students, the federal government program for parents, and it's called the PLUS loan. And there's a bunch of, you might have heard different things about this. It's great. You should take it. If you call the college and say, which loan should I borrow? They usually start here because they feel safe since it's the federal government. And you know, a lot of people say this is everything that's wrong with college, and this is the main variable, the main reason why college is so expensive today, right? I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that, but then at the same time, it's the right solution for a meaningful amount of families. Okay. And we'll talk about some of the pros and cons specifically and help you figure out if this makes sense for your family. And we did get a question around forgiveness programs, specifically with the PLUS loan. So this is as good a time as any to hit on this. If you're anywhere in the civil service and it's or nonprofit sector, and it's a pretty broad umbrella in terms of what the PLUS loan will allow for in terms of being eligible for these forgiveness programs at a minimum. But if you're a police officer, if you're a firefighter, if you're a nurse, if you're a teacher, if you work at a college or work at some of these nonprofits, I would at least investigate the PLUS loan forgiveness program, because for some families, it's a very interesting opportunity. I've recommended it more than once, and I've seen it play out the way that we hoped it would more than once, right? So, and the short premise of it is that if you fit into one of these categories, you can borrow the full amount via the PLUS loan for all 4 years of college, defer any payments until after graduation, then consolidate it into one repayment. And you can, for example, set it up in such a way that it's a 30-year repayment plan. But after 10 years of making payments, any balance is forgiven. So it's not one of these things that you're still going to have to, in most cases, pay something and probably pay a meaningful amount. But after 10 years of repayments, if you are let into this forgiveness program, the balance will be forgiven. I think you could probably go to the next slide, Peg. So, and the biggest caveat I would say, right, before I get into pros and cons that you need to be aware of if you're considering this program for your family, only the parent or parent's name is attached to this loan. So if you're a family that says, I need my kid to be formally attached to the amount of money that we're going to have to borrow, pretty much this option is off the table for your family. Okay, so that's one thing you need to be thinking about. Who do you want formally attached to this note, to this loan? Because this program only has the parent's name on it, right? Now, some families will still use it and they'll just say, hey, once it goes into repayment, I'm going to have my kid have their bank account attached to it and they're going to debit that account each month. That's fine. You can do it that way, but it's a handshake agreement. They are not formally attached to this note in any capacity. So it's a caveat that's important that you understand. Go ahead, Peg, please. So some of the cons here, right? Again, this kind of depends on your family, but the parent is on the name of this loan for the life of the loan. Very high origination fee. You're not going to find a higher origination fee for any of the loan options. 4% and change here, right? So right away, 4% is coming off the top of the loan. The rate, I'm sure for some of you, you're looking at that over 8% fixed interest rate as astronomical. I totally get why it feels that way, but believe it or not, it's kind of in the middle of the pack. We put it in the con category because there are other options that are going to come with lower rates. But believe it or not, next to their peers, it's not insanely high, but it's enough to put it in the con category. And in terms of the pros, if you want to go to the next one, Peg, by far the biggest advantage with the PLUS loan, and they don't have a close rival, there is no close second here, is how flexible you can be with your repayment terms. The federal government is very lenient in this sense, right? And kind of and some argue too lenient, right? The credit requirements are very loose. You don't have to have an income to qualify for the PLUS loan, believe it or not, okay? And then you borderline get to make up your own payment plan, right? I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you can choose to do it in a 30-year repayment plan. You can set it up in such a way that it's an income-based repayment plan where the amount of your repayment is only tied to the amount of your income. And you can change repayment plans really an unlimited number of times at any time. You're not going to get this flexibility anywhere else. And again, you can consolidate it not only between multiple years, but also between multiple children, and there's no prepayment penalties. That's not a unique feature. Just about all educational loans are different than your mortgage, for example, where there's not any prepayment penalties. But those are some of the big pros, and the big takeaway being they're the most flexible. So if I'm somebody that has a inconsistent income, or the future I'm a little bit nervous about from an income standpoint, this is something you would take a closer look at. Go ahead.
Yeah, I
Jenny.
just gotta say here that you just have to be careful with this loan, because the college can offer you whatever their total cost is minus any aid you got from them. That delta, they can give it all to you. You don't have to take that much. And you need to think about this over 4 years, and don't get caught up in the emotion of all of it and say, oh, well, $40,000, we're just going to do it, because that's $160,000. You really need to be careful.
Great point. So not all states have a state borrowing program. They don't get you don't hear a lot about them, right? And usually you only hear about your state's program if you have one. From any given year, usually 15 to 20 states will participate in this. So and a lot of them are concentrated up here in the Northeast. It used to be that you could only take advantage of a state's program if you lived in that state or your kid was going to college in that state. This year is the first time there's actually 2 states, Rhode Island and Massachusetts, where you can use their programs, their state's programs, whether your kid goes to school in Rhode Island and Mass, whether you live in Rhode Island and Mass or not, right? So you could live in Hawaii and go to the University of Washington and still use either Rhode Island's or Massachusetts programs. And we want you to take a look at those because they're pretty competitive. Definitely have better rates than the federal government. Both the student and the parent is attached to this loan, right? They call them co-borrowers is the terminology that they use. So for families that say, hey, I need my kid, I want my kid to have some formal skin in the game with this loan, it checks that box for you. So at a minimum, we want you to kick the tires there. See if your state has a program. And take a look at Massachusetts and Rhode Island. RISLA is the name of the Rhode Island program. MIFA is the name of Massachusetts program. And you can probably go to the next slide, Peggy. I talked through a lot of these, but in terms of the cons, you're not going to get the same consumer protection you get with the federal government, right? It's not that same flexibility and, hey, we want to change our repayment plan now, and hey, we want a 30-year repayment plan. You're not going to get that. It's not as easy to qualify for as the federal government program, right? So if you really struggle with credit, I'm less optimistic that they're going to approve you for this loan. But those are a couple of the downsides. And again, in terms of a couple of the pros on the next slide here, I hit on, I think, most of these, but again, the fact that both the student and the parent are going to be on it. You just want to be aware, I guess, that based on the repayment plan you choose is going to dictate your rate. If you want the most competitive rate, you got it, but you're going to start making payments tomorrow, right? If you want more flexibility, hey, I want to be like the plus loan. I don't want to have to make a payment for 4.5 years. You got it, but you're going to pay a premium in terms of the rate for that. And this is common, right? Every kind of good thing we're getting, we're probably giving something up on the other end here. You can go ahead to the private student loan sector. So these are I already got the question, should we take a college AB or a Citizens or, these types of loans? And as a matter of fact, let me just, if you want, Peg, and don't worry about it if you don't have it handy, but to grab that private student loan link within MyCap, we can kind of share that in the chat so people know where
let me go grab it.
Yeah. So, but on the is one better than the other? Short answer is no, right? And these guys are usually incredibly similar. The biggest pain in the butt about the private student loans is that unlike the state programs, unlike the federal government, where you actually have to go through an application to see what rate your family qualifies for, right? And that rate and those repayment terms is going to be 100% dictated by the strength or lack thereof of the cosigner's credit. If you have an incredibly strong application, if you got great credit, if you have yeah, we know that the slides aren't sharing, guys. Peg's just grabbing this link quick.
This is a long link, so I don't know.
Yeah,
if this is the one.
you can put it in there; it'll still work. But and if we have time at the end, I'll share it. But this link, you can go there, and that is long as promised. But if you go to that link, you'll type in the college that your student's attending. Not every college works with every lender, every private lender. It'll show you the lenders that they work with, and you can compare kind of apples to apples. But and you can go to the next slide for the cons here, Peg. But the thing here is these guys get a bad name for their lack of transparency, and I think they earn that, right? So we have to go through the application before we know our rates and repayments terms. They'll usually lead front and center with this rate that looks fairly attractive, but if you read the fine print, it's a variable rate. You have to scroll down on the page to see what your fixed rate is going to be, and those variable caps are usually incredibly high. So, but if you are a family that has very good credit, this is probably going to be where you're going to find the lowest rate, right? This year, especially with home equity rates being so high, et cetera. So even though this kind of sector can get a bad rap, it makes the most sense for a certain percentage of people. And I just got this question. I'm glad that we did. Should we wait to borrow if we can? Do we borrow up front? If we have resources, do we spread out over 4 years? Generally speaking, and again, we can't make firm recommendations to a whole bunch of people, right? This is where we can only make firm recommendations when we meet one-on-one. But generally speaking, we're going to advise, if you can delay borrowing a semester, do it. If you can delay borrowing a year, even better. Year and a half, awesome, right? You get the point. But as soon as we start borrowing, the meter is going to start running on the interest. So we would rather front load our resources initially and delay borrowing for as long as we possibly can. That is usually what makes the most sense for most people. Again, I can't give that a firm recommendation here. But again, the biggest problem with these loans, lack of transparency, and they can be incredibly high rates if you don't have a strong application. Okay. And in terms of the pros, right, again, as I mentioned on the next slide here, if you have a strong application, if you have excellent credit, they're going to be very competitive rates, maybe the best rates, maybe what we're going to recommend for you. This is also the loan that's the most kind of in the student's name, plus loan just in the parent's name. State programs, co-borrowers, kind of both of you. Private student loans, although you're still there as the co-signer, the lender looks at this as primarily the student's loan, and they're kind of, again, the most responsible, for lack of a better term there.
Yeah, and some of the programs, as it says here, they'll even release the co-signer
Release programs after you've made a certain amount of payments. The co-signer or co-borrower can get released, and you'll get this in the follow-up slide, guys. But this is a newer-ish lending program it's in the private student loan sector, but very competitive interest rates, as you can see here. Especially this year, the kind of biggest con, I guess, is that you can, again, quotes, only borrow up to $12,000 per school year. But again, we'll send you this in the follow-up, but it was something that was brought to our attention not too long ago. That's a nice little program that these guys don't have the advertising dollars. That's why they're not banging you over the head like the Sally Mays of the world.
That's just some more detail. Okay, so let me talk about a few other places that people will turn to besides cash flow and loans. If you have equity in your home, you have market value minus whatever mortgages you have some equity in your home. If it's $500,000, sometimes people will borrow on that equity. There's different ways to do that. There's something called a home equity line of credit. That's where the bank says, hey, you're eligible to pull $100,000. You're not pulling it. You're not taking the money, but it's sitting there and it's a bucket that you can pull from. You're going to pay interest on that. Most people make interest-only payments, and then it converts more into a mortgage. There's also a home equity loan. That's where you are pulling a chunk of money out and you're realizing it and you have those funds. The downside of that is that you are holding those funds. So if you pull $150,000 out to pay for college and you're filling out the FAFSA and the CSS profile, that's an asset that you now own that you have to put on the financial aid form. You can share with the college why you have that and show proof of it, but it's a thing. Then there's also something called a cash out refi. I was doing these hand over fist several years ago with families because interest rates were so low and people needed to refinance their house from a financial planning standpoint. And it was a win-win because they could pull some money out. It's a different world now, right? If you have a great interest rate on your mortgage and you refied 3 years ago, you're sitting pretty right now. You do not want to refinance your house, probably not when the 30-year mortgages are up at 7%, right? And if you're sitting at 3.5 or 3. So just keep that in mind. But these are, some people will tap their equity. Some people over tap their equity in 2008 and got in deep doo-doo. So you got to be careful with that from a financial planning standpoint. 401ks. So some people will tap their 401k. You truly are robbing from your retirement. That's why you saved it. And for retirement, not for college, and now you're pulling it. You need to be careful with this for a bunch of reasons, that being the first one. Typically, these loans have to be repaid in 5 years. If you leave this job or get fired, you have to pay it back. Your 401k plan has to allow loans. So it's your employer has to have that in the loan, in the plan specs, and it may not even be an option. So again, I typically, when people are resorting to this, a lot of times that means it's not a good idea. I'm not saying that across the board, but that is an option. Intra-family loans. I've seen this a decent amount where there's a brother who never had kids who makes a nice living and is like, I want to help out and I'll give a low interest loan. These are nice because they don't affect financial aid. There's a promissory note, you're paying the interest, or the student's going to be expected. I've had parents do this for their kids. And it's like, instead of taking out a Parent Plus loan or whatever, there's so much I'm willing to spend, but if they're willing to pay me back when they graduate, the biggest downside of these is it's family and money is changing hands. And so it can get awkward and sometimes there's friction and it hurts relationships. So you want to be careful about that. But it's, if it's something that can be done and be done well, it's not a bad option. And sometimes it can be much, much better than paying high interest rate in a private loan or something like that. Life insurance. So there are some life insurance policies out there where you can fund it and then you can borrow off of it. This is a whole complete conversation with your financial advisor, with somebody who understands financial aid like we do. It's not something to just do knee-jerk because an insurance person calls you up and says, hey, you can hide or take all this money off the table. But it is an option, and I've seen people use it and it's worked well, but I've seen more often than not the other way. So it's something you really need to go in with your eyes wide open and have really good counsel around it, professional counsel before you jump into this. But for some people, it is a good way to pay for college. All right, I'll turn it back over to you, Matt.
Cool. And let me just hit a couple of kind of repeat questions here. I know a confusing one. The American Opportunity Tax Credit is a really confusing one. How I like to coach it is just like an example. If I owe $30,000 to the college for the bill, that's what I owe. That's what I'm left on the hook for after financial aid, whatever. I have $50,000 in my 529 plan, so I have it covered. Most people make the mistake, okay, of paying that entire $30,000 from the 529, and that's it. But if their AGI is less than $180,000, they could be leaving that tax credit on the table because you have to come up with $4,000 from somewhere else. It's a stupid little loophole. Okay, let's call it what it is. But you have to. So in our recommendation would be take $26,000 from your 529 and then that additional 4,000, do it from your savings account, do it with a payment plan with the college, whatever. But come up with $4,000 from somewhere aside from your 529 to make sure that you qualify for the American Opportunity Tax Credit. And for everybody else, so long as your income is below the thresholds, you're going to get the American Opportunity Tax Credit. If you're not pulling from 529 at all, you don't have one of those, you've never heard of one of those, don't worry about it. We always just recommend you flag it for your CPAs. Most of them are on it, but we've seen enough people miss it. You just make sure that you say, hey guys, or hey, whoever is your CPA, we got a kid that's going to be a full-time college student next year. We want to make sure we take advantage of the American Opportunity Tax Credit. Make sure that that's on their radar, right? You don't want to miss that, because that's, it's a nice little, it's a credit. It's not just, deducting your taxable income. So it matters.
Yeah, because some people, they learn the hard way the first tax year, because it's like, oops, I can't take that. And so they've lost a year to take it. So yeah, it's better to understand it up front.
And you know what, in terms of, because I don't know if I said this, I think it's on the slide, but with that federal government direct student loan, that 27,000, it's use it or lose it, right? So if you don't use it this year, you can't go back next year and be like, you know what, that is a great program, and this was a little bit harder on our cash flow than we thought. I'll take last year's 5,500 and this year's 6,500. You can't do it. Last year's 5,500 is gone. You can still use, you could just start the program in sophomore or junior year if you got an older kid and you haven't used this yet. It's not too late. You just can't use years retroactively behind you. So, and we got a bunch of questions. How do we meet with you guys one-on-one? I promise that's how we're going to spend the last 5 minutes or so, talking about how you can meet with anybody on our team individually.
Well, yeah, and based on what Matt just said about the loans, that's why you do a 4-year cash flow. You don't do this year by year, because then you won't use up your whole 529 and then say, I want to go back and get the federal loans, and you can't. Plan it all out, and you can tweak it as you go, but look at it over 4 years.
Right. And so in a little bit, in some ways, I'm gonna, I don't think contradict myself in these, next 2 slides here, but get your wheels turning. And then and I think initially, as you're thinking about this, it's easy to waffle, right? And kind of get on both sides of the fences, because in most families that borrow, the vast majority, you're throwing darts and hoping you get lucky. Right. And everything is just kind of like, well, I heard Sallie Mae was the best, or maybe they just are in my face every day. So I did Sallie Mae. I called the college and they said, or there was a plus loan in my financial aid award letter, right? It's very, thumb in the air. Let's hope we get lucky. You're not going to do that. Like something I say all the time, there's no easy way to borrow money. It's not a fun thing to do, but I think there's something to be said for saying, hey, I understood all my choices and I made the right one for my family, right? That's great. Even if it comes with interest and we're taking out this huge nut and all that. And I'm going to kind of reemphasize this point over the next few minutes here, but even it matters to do your homework, because on average, a 1% swing in the amount of the loan rate that you end up choosing on average will account for $30,000 in the total amount that you end up repaying. So it matters, right? The rates matter. And again, you'll see on the next slide here, which you can go to, Peggy. In some ways, I'm gonna, again, I don't know if contradict is the right word. Do rates matter? Hell yeah, they matter. Is it the only thing that matters? Not at all. And usually when folks show up to meet with us, and tonight was no different. It's like, okay, what loan should I take? Sallie Mae or Citizens or the plus loan or whatever, right? And I have to say, and I do say, well, I got a handful of questions to ask you, and based on how you answer them is going to dictate what I'm going to recommend for your family, right? And I'll always start with, how much does the rate matter? Of course the rate matters. We want the lowest rate possible. Great. Is that all you care about? Do we just want the lowest rate possible? If you do, this is going to be a simple, quick conversation. Do you have excellent credit? Yes. Then go compare side by side and apply for a couple private student loans. There's your answer. If you don't have excellent credit, probably wipe the private student loan sector off the table. And now we're talking about, maybe the state, maybe it's the plus loan. But before we even go there, I think some of the questions that very few people are thinking about for a long time, or probably conversations that I would venture a guess that most of you haven't had at home yet. Who's responsible for this loan? Is it the parents? Is it the student? Is it everybody, all the above? How much for each? Do we care whose name is formally attached to the loan? Yes or no? Right. So you can see where this very quickly will dictate, based on what you've just learned, what bucket you'll fit in. Because if a family tells me, listen, just our value system in our house, I need my student to be formally attached to this note, to this loan. Well, great. Plus loans off the table. There's one down. Now let's talk about the state or the private sector, right? Whereas other folks would be like, we really don't care. We're totally comfortable. Even if we go the plus loan rate and we think it's our kids' responsibility, we're totally comfortable making that a handshake agreement. And there's no right or wrong. There's no judgment from our side of the fence there, but you need to kind of self-identify where you guys are at as a family. And kind of bullet points 3 and 4 here go hand in hand, in my opinion, because it's like, how much do you value this consumer protection or this flexibility? Or I'd put those both under the term insurance. A lot of times I'll refer to the plus loan as like, you pay a premium, it's like paying for insurance. Because again, say you're somebody that's in sales and your sales schedule is really unpredictable, or you're a business owner and from one season to the next, we just don't know, right? Or your industry or whatever is a little bit unpredictable right now. If those kind of resonate with you, well, then I might be like, you might consider the plus loan, because are you going to pay more than the state? Yeah, you're going to. Are you going to pay more than Sallie Mae or anybody in the private sector? If you have excellent credit, yeah, you're going to pay more. But maybe you value those things in such a way that you can say consciously and strategically, I'm choosing to pay more for the upside I get kind of with these features, right? So that's why, again, I think it becomes pretty clear of why we can't just say the plus loan is the best loan. Sallie Mae is the best. College Ave is the best. Rizla in Rhode Island's the best, right? It's what's the best for you. And that's what we're trying to get to here. And then the last one, I'm not having this conversation this year because it doesn't make sense to use home equity this year I haven't met anybody that it's made sense for yet. But in the past, we've tried to help some people, I think, sometimes, or not, or just be comfortable to be like, because I think there was, for some people have a philosophical opposition to using home equity. And I just think that's worth unpacking that conversation. But for this year, it's not. And you can probably go to the next slide, Peggy. As a matter of fact, I can probably share my screen, I think. Yeah, I can. So here's the deal, guys. And we got this question a lot, and I will put this, I can put this, or Peg can probably grab this.
Yeah, I'll grab it.
This link for you, but this is what we're going to recommend. Okay. And this is a firm recommendation. I feel incredibly confident that with everything that's at stake, and when you're probably looking at this bill, that best case scenario-ish is $20,000 for next year. Maybe it's as high as $90,000 next year. As some of you well know, a lot of these colleges hit the $90,000 mark or wherever in between. And what you do this year is kind of your foundation for subsequent years. So really it has a lot to do with your 4-year plan. And if you have multiple kids, it has to do with your, 6, 8, 10, 12-year plan, whatever that happens to be. You're going to thank yourself if you decide to book an hour with one of us. Doesn't matter if it's Peg or me or anybody on our team. Anybody on our team is going to help you make the right decision here and help you sleep soundly at night. And like I said at the top, sometimes, this is rare, but sometimes I'll go into these meetings and meet with somebody that's incredibly prepared, has done all of their homework, so much research, and has said, here's what I'm thinking about doing. Would you do it this way if you're in my shoes? I'll have my questions and we'll dig in pretty deep, but I'll go, you know what? I wouldn't change one thing. You're nailing it. And I still think that you're getting your $239 worth if that's where your family lands, right? Now, for most families, we're going to have recommendations. We can do things we're going to gut check your award. Did you get a good award at Northwestern? Is that a fair award at Boston University based on your family's EFC? Sometimes I spent some time earlier today going through their award that they got did not make sense to me. based on what they were sharing. So I had them pull up their FAFSA and CSS profile, and I directed them towards a couple of things that I wanted to look at. They made some huge mistakes. They're going to end up getting another 10, 15 grand, whatever. I'm not promising that, but I'm just saying take the opportunity to make sure that, number one, did you get as good of a deal as you could possibly get at the school that you went to? And now, and maybe the answer is yes, right? It could be, yep, this sounds right, great. Now let's go figure out the right way to pay this bill. When should you use what resources? What loan should your family take? So if you have a free account, or you've just created your account, right, you can, and actually maybe it's easiest to show within the platform here. One of these tabs, I have to have a MyCap account, one would think. So give me 1 second, please.
I mean, I have it opened if you need me to show it.
Oh, that's fine. I'll just get right in here. Oh, see, is that some of our experts there? No, back office guys.
No, that's the team.
Of
us are experts.
I was gonna say, good looking team too. But within your accounts here, right? If you've already created these, and if you haven't, just go to mycap.collegeaidpro.com, and just, Peggy, if you would, just put that in the that in the chat there. If you haven't created your account, go to your account and choose the valedictorian option if you're just creating your account now, and that will get you access to the platform for a year, and you'll get an hour with any one of us to use whenever you want, at any point you want during the next year. Obviously, if you're getting ready to pay the bill, you're probably using that sooner than later. And use this coupon code BORROW20, and you'll get 20% off. That expires at midnight tonight, midnight Eastern time, so 9 o'clock for you West Coast folks. So don't overthink that one, guys. You're going to be thanking yourself for that, and use it for whatever you want. If you are an underclassman, use the hour and whenever you want, right? As you're starting to build your college list, if you want us to review forms, whatever. And then if you already have your account, if you've already are a paid user, you can just say talk to an expert and book your time, and again put in that coupon code. Or if you're in the free version, this button will say upgrade. You choose the valedictorian option, and you use this borrow 20. But yeah, do that tonight. That's about as low as we'll discount. We usually, for those of you who've been on with us before, we take care of the folks that show up live with us. But that'll be gone tomorrow. You'll absolutely have an opportunity to meet with anybody after tonight, obviously, or be able to book after tonight. You just won't have the 20% off. So I feel strongly about that. It's a big decision. It's an important decision. And I just think it's, when you're looking at $20, $30, $40, $50,000 times 4 years, nobody likes to think about spending money, right? But $239 with what's at stake, I think is something you'll thank yourself for. Obviously, I'm biased, right? Obviously, I want everybody to book an hour, right? But I also believe in that investment. And, if you're new to us, do your homework on us, read the reviews on us, talk to people that that have met with us before, see what they're saying. But first, buy your hour, because that's gonna expire. Let me see if we have.
Yeah, Matt made that blanket comment about equity. I mean, his point is kind of leaning to what I said. Your interest rates on mortgages are much higher now. So it used to be something that we did all the time because it made sense for financial aid and to pay for school, and it made sense in overall financial planning mode. And now it usually doesn't. Just like we said at the top of the hour, everybody's different. So that might be something you want to talk through, right? But for a lot of people, it's not the top of the list right now, I think is what Matt meant. So yeah, that's where he's going.
Right. Yeah, correct. Yeah, we're getting some questions about subsequent hours to $299 for subsequent hours.
Yeah, somebody asked, is this recurring? No, you pay for the hour. It's not a recurring thing. Every time you need it, you can book it. That's the beauty of it. You just book it when you need it, and it's easy to book. And then you see everybody's schedule, and you can pick a time that works well for you, and you're good to go. It's super easy.
Yep. Yeah, and you have full access to the platform and all of our features for a year as well, right? So if you're a new user to us, you get the software for essentially for free for the year, all the bells and whistles, the upgraded software, not just the free version. So and then if after a year that expires, if you want to stay on, it's $5 a month, $4.99 a month after that year, but you have the option, you have to opt into that. Yeah, so let's see. And obviously tons of great questions, guys. We just can't get to all of them. We got to about 60 of them between the chat and the Q&A, which is not bad, Peg. We did about one a minute. I would say that's decent. And I'd like to, maybe if we throw in the live ones, we're up to 65. So
70, 75,
maybe 100. Maybe we did hit triple digits now that I'm, now that I'm flushing out the details.
Yeah. And what you need to bring to the meeting, it really depends. Don't stress about that. If you sign up for a meeting, you can always write in and say, what do I need for this meeting? And our support team will write you back and you'll be very prepared. So don't worry about that.
Yeah. And so long as you create your account, which you have to book the meeting, we have that information from the back end. So we're able to show up to that meeting going, okay, here's the schools, here's the EFCs. And so, we're starting on third base basically, right? And if you want to kind of go above and beyond, have the FAFSA and CSS profile handy, because sometimes it makes sense to just take a quick peek at that to see if we can poke any holes in how you guys completed that. Peggy, it's been a long day, sister.
Yeah. I started my day at 1 a.m. Pacific time. So yes, it's been
You're a warrior.
It's all good.
You're a warrior. I know. I'm not bitching to you. You know that, buddy.
Well, I was on a plane, so boo-hoo for me, my first world issues. So
yeah.
All right, guys. Well, a lot of people wrote in, thank you. You're very welcome. And one person said I was clueless and now I have a starting point. That's great. I know this was a lot. You'll get the deck, you'll get the recording. Just take a deep breath, look at it again, digest it. But from this, if you feel like, you know what, I'm going to want to talk to somebody, just book it tonight. And then you can actually pay for it tonight. You can book it in a week after you've watched the recording, look through the slides. And yeah, just as Matt always says, just don't overthink it. We're not, I know it's $239 isn't nothing, but in the scope of things of what you're about to spend, it can easily pay for itself over and over again, just for peace of mind and being knowledgeable. So
special shout out to the Murphy family in Marsh Vegas, Massachusetts. Congratulations to their son Dylan, their oldest. Great boy, great family. Sending the love to you guys. Thanks for saying hi. Peggy, is that it, buddy?
We are good to go. 4 minutes after. So everybody have a great night.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.